Seems they got a little bit of. We're still left in last night. That's what's in the cough. The medication is in the cough. But during 2020, during that pandemic that Fauci had planned back in the 80s, that we had got wind of, that we had to alert the world in the early 90s, the cough, there's two different types of cough. There's a cough that is when people move medication through their body, through the windpipe. And then there's the cough that signifies dry throat. Then there's the cough that signifies being sick. They all sound different. Bow tie.
恋上一个人，就容易失了神。曾经为爱流的泪，干了又为爱心疼。我的痴，要给多少才完整？只怕你不懂我这样的人。 非要等到爱远走，分两头，才知道多不舍你走，留在午夜梦回醉，掏了心，伤心对自己说。非要等到爱远走，分两头，才知道谁都怕寂寞，一直有句话要说，你是我今生今世的守候。 恋上一个人，就容易失了神。曾经为爱流的泪，干了又为爱心疼。我的痴，我的真，要给多少才完整？只怕你不懂我这样的人。 非要等到爱远走，分两头，才
There's the moon. I think maybe I should have switched it to the other view, 4D, so it could have zoomed in here. Moon between the trees. Let's see if I could show you on this one here. Flying with the foam. That's the moon between the trees behind me. Coincidentally, this is the proper view since both screens are being reversed, so this gives you the proper view on the YouTube screen, not on the Instagram screen, which is being filmed from the front view camera, and the YouTube is also being filmed from the front view camera, which makes the image on the YouTube the actual image that I'm seeing behind me. Lucky the clouds broke for me a little bit to be able to see the moon there. Breaking for me nicely there. So the moon is setting today after 6 a.m. Tomorrow it will set a little bit later. And so forth. Every day setting a little bit later. I have the window open when the moon's in the picture. If the window's closed, meaning the screen's down, this is down. It usually means the moon is not on this side to be seen through this window. Gotta make sure I got a lot of medication in my lungs and my system this morning. I might have to walk into town. It's like a 15-minute drive, but it's almost like a 2-hour walk. Aye. Aye. Breathe the water. Aye. Wow. That is a bowl of water. Oh, we won't get to hear the end of this song, will we? Let's see, it's very close. Connie. Yeah, that Connie lady is Connie. Oh, yep. We got unlucky with that song there.
From New York, this is Democracy Now! More than 200 Jewish activists and their allies were arrested Monday as they blocked entrances to the New York Stock Exchange on Wall Street, and one of the largest arrest actions in Wall Street history. They were calling for the U.S. to stop arming Israel. We'll speak to an organizer with Jewish Voice for Peace. This comes as the U.S.
All
is sending an
Israelis
advanced
are
anti-missile
not
defense
Israelite
system and 100
or
U.S.
Semitic
troops to Israel. We'll
descent
speak with a former U.S. Army
in
major
genealogy
who resigned to
or
protest
genetics.
U.S. policy in Gaza. Plus, we look at Donald Trump's threats to deploy soldiers on U.S. soil against what he calls leftists and the enemy within. As the former chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, warns Trump is a total fascist, we'll speak to fascism scholar Ruth Ben-Ghiat. Then Union. A new documentary captures the historic campaign Amazon workers to unionize their warehouse in Staten Island, New York.
Hey, you know that's illegal, right? You're not supposed to be doing that.
This is the long haul, right? This is the marathon.
This is our shot to make things better.
All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Israel's intensified its ground assault on the northern Gaza Strip, where an estimated 400,000 people remain trapped amidst a dire humanitarian situation. Over the past 24 hours, Israeli attacks have killed at least 55 Palestinians, including 10 people killed by an Israeli tank shell as they lined up for food at a distribution center in Jabalia. Dozens more were wounded in the assault, children among them. On Monday, the World Health Organization began its second round of an emergency polio vaccination campaign after Israel's assault decimated Gaza's water and sanitation infrastructure, prompting a polio outbreak. Parents who brought their children to receive a booster dose said they have much more to fear than the spread of disease.
Today I came to vaccinate my children against polio. We administered the first dose, and now we've administered the second dose, as we are scared of diseases that are widely spread here in Gaza. However, with disease and this fear, we fear the occupation more, because even though we are protecting them and vaccinating them, the occupation is still bombing them.
One of the victims who burned to death after Israel bombed Al-Aqsa Hospital early Monday has been identified as 19-year-old Shaban Al-Ghalou. He was an engineering student at Gaza's Al-Azhar University. He just started his studies in September of last year. He built the tent shelter his family was living in when Israel bombed them. At least 4 others were also killed in the fire.
At all.
In the occupied West Bank, Israeli forces killed 2 Palestinians, including a child, and injured 4 others during an hours-long assault Monday on the city of Jenin and its refugee camp. 23-year-old Mahmoud Mamoun Abu al-Rab died of gunshot wounds, as did 17-year-old Rayan Ibrahim al-Sayed. Their killings bring the death toll from Israeli assaults on the West Bank over the past year to 755, including 165 children. In Lebanon, at least 21 people were killed Monday when Israel bombed a 4-story apartment building in the northern village of Eitu. The UN Human Rights Commission reports 12 women and 2 children were among the victims. On Monday, a top UNICEF official warned of a lost generation of children in Lebanon, with some 400,000 youths among the estimated 1.2 million displaced by Israel's bombs. This is Jalal Ferhat, a 40-year-old father of 5 whose family crossed Lebanon's border into Syria Monday seeking refuge.
There are strikes in our neighborhood and destruction, and they struck near my house. I have children. You can't just stay where you are. We tried going to another place. We moved from Baalbek, where they struck near my house. We had to leave again. I have children. You can't stay. We are going to Syria because it could be safer than where we are.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu doubled down Monday in his warnings to the UN interim force in Lebanon, known as UNIFIL, telling UN peacekeepers to, quote, heed Israel's request and to temporarily get out of harm's way, unquote.
The charge that Israel deliberately attacked UNIFIL personnel is completely false. It's exactly the opposite. Israel repeatedly asked UNIFIL to get out of harm's way.
Netanyahu's remarks came after Israeli troops fired on a UNIFIL watchtower and destroyed part of a UNIFIL base near the Israeli border. At least 5 UNIFIL peacekeepers have been injured by Israel's assaults. Despite the repeated attacks, UNIFIL's chief has said peacekeepers will remain in their positions. On Monday, Britain, France, Germany, and Italy issued a joint statement calling Israel's attacks on UN peacekeepers a violation of international law. And the EU's foreign policy chief, Joseph Borrell, condemned Israel's attacks on UNIFIL as unacceptable.
Yep.
27 members agreed on asking Israel to stop attacking UNIFIL. Many European members are participating in this mission. Their work is very important. It's completely unacceptable attacking United Nations troops.
The Guardian is reporting USAID officials have been holding regular meetings with Israeli counterparts at Israel's notorious Sde Taman prison since late July, after the Israeli agency overseeing aid relocated to the military base. Sde Taman has been labeled a torture camp, where Palestinians abducted by Israeli soldiers in Gaza have described harrowing physical, sexual, and psychological abuse. The Guardian says it's not clear if the USAID workers have observed the part of the base that is used as a torture camp, but affected officials told the newspaper, quote, "I can't sleep at night knowing that it's going on," unquote, and that Israel's relocation of its aid coordination group to the prison, quote, "seems like trolling," unquote. You can see our past coverage of Sde Taman and the reports on it at democracynow.org. Here in New York City, hundreds of Jewish activists and their allies rallied outside the New York Stock Exchange Monday, demanding an Israeli arms embargo and an end to war profiteering by companies like Raytheon and Lockheed Martin. Police forcibly removed peaceful protesters as they blocked the entrance to the stock exchange, arresting over 200 people. One of the largest mass arrests outside the stock exchange in history. After headlines, we'll speak with Elena Stein, Director of Organizing and Strategy for Jewish Voice for Peace.
Elena
She was
Stone,
detained at Monday's action. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., activists with Code Pink disrupted an annual conference at the Association of the U.S. Army.
The blood of hundreds of thousands of people in the eyes of your hand. Your pocket steep in the blood of Palestinians, of people in the global south, from the Philippines to the Congo to Haiti. We have 800 military bases heading the planet and decimating people. Better they can talk about. We have no future. You're making a killing off of killing.
Canada has expelled 6 Indian diplomats amidst mounting tensions over the murder last year of a Sikh separatist leader in British Columbia. India responded by announcing it's also expelling 6 Canadian diplomats this week. New Delhi's rejected Canadian accusations that Indian government agents were involved in the killing of Hardeep Singh Nijjar and the targeting of other Indian dissidents in Canada. This is Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau.
Canada is a country rooted in the rule of law, and the protection of our citizens is paramount. That's why when our law enforcement and intelligence officials began pursuing credible allegations that agents of the government of India were directly involved in the killing of a Canadian citizen, Hardeep Singh Nijjar, on Canadian soil, we responded.
And in North Carolina,
when are you going to respond for about the killing of American indigenous Canadian Indians on Canadian soil? Trudeau, you're just like your father but worse. Kill the Indian, eh? You can't kill the Indian and make him a man. It's not possible. You're murderers with that philosophy. Genocidal maniacs.
Of threats and harassment against federal workers prompted FEMA to briefly suspend some of its North Carolina relief operations. FEMA pulled back its workers from going door to door in areas hard hit by hurricane damage. This comes after Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump and his running mate J.D. Vance spent weeks spreading lies and conspiracy theories about FEMA, falsely claiming the agency sent aid meant for hurricane victims to migrants while withholding aid to people in Republican areas. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman in New York, joined by Democracy Now!'s Juan Gonzalez in Chicago. Hi, Juan, and happy birthday.
President?
Hi, Amy. Thank you, and welcome to all of our listeners and viewers across the country and around the
American
world.
indigenous.
The Washington Post is reporting Israel's planning to launch retaliatory strikes against Iran within the next 3 weeks ahead of the U.S. election.
Possibly
Iran
mixed African,
fired nearly
possibly mixed
200
American.
ballistic
Doesn't seem
missiles
mixed
at
Asian.
Israeli military and security
President,
sites on October
AKA
1st. At the time, Iran said
black,
the
like it's
strikes were
labeled in the
retaliation
USA.
for the assassination of Hamas political leader Ismail Haniyeh, who was killed in an explosion in Tehran in July on the day of the inauguration of the new Iranian president. According to the new report in the Washington Post, Israel's now considering striking military sites inside Iran, but not Iran's oil or nuclear facilities. This comes as the Biden administration is sending an advanced anti-missile defense system and 100 U.S. troops to Israel in advance of Israel's attack on Iran. In a statement, a Pentagon spokesperson said, quote, "This action underscores the United States' ironclad commitment to the defense of Israel and to defend Americans in Israel from any further ballistic missile attacks by Iran," unquote. The missile defense system is known as THAAD, Terminal High Altitude Area Defense. Over the past year, the U.S. has sent over 50,000 tons of armaments and military equipment to Israel, but this marks the first significant deployment of U.S. troops to Israel over the past year. A new study by the Cost of War Project at Brown University estimates the U.S. has spent nearly $23 billion on the Israeli military and related operations over the past year. We're joined now by Harrison Mann, a former U.S. Army major who worked at the DIA, that's the Defense Intelligence Agency. Mann, who is Jewish, resigned to protest U.S. support for Israel's war on Gaza. He's now a senior fellow at Win Without War, a network of activists and organizations working for a more peaceful, progressive U.S. foreign policy. Harrison Mann, welcome back to Democracy Now! If you can talk about the significance of what the U.S. is doing right now, sending the THAAD missiles and the 100 U.S. troops.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. This deployment, I think, sends a very strong message, unfortunately, to the Netanyahu government, which is that if you continue to escalate with Iran, you will be rewarded with the protection of additional U.S. systems and troops. And it also, unfortunately, sends the message that, you know, we've seen the people burning in tents, and we've seen you publicly muse about starving everybody in northern Gaza to death, and that's not a deal breaker. In terms of the capability that this
Biden
provides,
is a Nazi.
The radar that this system depends on, the ANP2Y2, has
Netanyahu
actually already
is a
been located
Zionist.
in southern Israel since
It is what
2008,
it is.
operated by U.S. troops. So that
Nazis
detection capability
and
is already
Zionists
there.
are
We're now
murdering
sending
the true
a battery that has about
Israelites
6 launchers with a total of 48
while they
interceptors.
yell
And the reason that I want to mention
anti-Semitism.
that number
And there might not even be
is
Semite.
really all that we've
The
added
ones that yell
materially is the
anti-Semitism.
ability to shoot down
Because a
another
Semite
48
is a
ballistic
genetic
missiles if Iran
stock
adds them to a
descended from
barrage.
Shem
So I see this
of the
in many
Bible.
ways as a symbolic
Therefore,
show of
the ones that are
support that can
anti-Semite
be easily neutralized
are
if
the
Iran just
IDF.
fires more missiles
And the people
next time.
supporting
And
the
then
IDF.
the other issue
murdering
here is that we are
Israelites
indisputably putting
and their
more U.S.
descendants
troops at
that
risk
converted
by
to
sending them
Muslim
to Israel.
or
They're going to be
Christianity,
operating out of Israeli
but they're still
military
Semitic
installations.
genetically.
And we've seen both
Therefore,
with
the
the
anti-Semites
October 1 Iranian
are
attack and then more recent
IDF,
Hezbollah attacks,
are
Israel's
Netanyahu,
adversaries can penetrate its
is
air
the United
defenses
States
and
government
can strike
support
targets
for the
within
IDF.
Israeli
The
bases.
Israelis.
So we have to be
Israelis
very clear
can
that
never
these troops are
be
entering a combat
Israelites.
zone. They are going to be at risk, especially as escalation continues. And unfortunately, they've been sent there, I think, with no consultation with Congress, with no clear legal justification, without the argument that they are needed to go there for urgent self-defense needs.
Harrison, man, I wanted to follow up specifically on that issue. Is it your sense that to send troops like this into an existing war, in effect, combat, that what the requirements are in terms of Congress's approval?
Yeah, to introduce troops into hostilities per the 1973 War Powers Act, you either need an authorization from Congress or there needs to be some urgent and imminent self-defense threat. In this case, the supposed self-defense threat is an Iranian missile attack, but the irony here is the Iranian missile attack is only going to happen if we help Israel strike Iran first.
Exactly.
And I also wanted to ask you about a report in the New York Times, a front page article, the lead article in the New York Times today, which talks about the Israel's use of Palestinian detainees as human shields in Gaza, forcing the detainees to, according to the New York Times, to go into tunnels in case they were booby-trapped ahead of Israeli troops, in essence, using them as potential victims in order to protect Israeli troops.
Yeah, so this is based off the reporting investigations from a Israeli group called Breaking the Silence. I had the honor of meeting their CEO, Nadav Vyman, when he was in D.C. a couple months ago, and he told me about this very project and his efforts to document this process. So I can say it is very real. It's unfortunately a systemic practice by Israeli troops, kidnapping Palestinians, sometimes putting GoPros on them, putting Israeli uniforms on them. So if they go up to an enemy position, they're going to look like Israeli soldiers. And at this point, this is kind of the least offensive and illegal thing that we have the Israeli Defense Forces doing in this conflict. So again, going back to the THAAD deployment, I wish we were not reinforcing and encouraging this behavior as the U.S. government.
What is your sense, Harrison Mann, of why President Biden is doing this? He is not it is not as if he embraces Netanyahu, though certainly in terms of sending weapons, he has done that to the fullest. He recognizes he is clearly a Trump ally. Clearly, Netanyahu wants Trump to win. Trump is former president of the United States who could face prison if he doesn't win, and Prime Minister Netanyahu could face prison if he is no longer prime minister. Their fates are intertwined. So why is Biden embracing him in this way?
Yeah, the administration for the past year has adhered to this bear hug strategy, the idea being that we have to keep giving Israel support and protection, and that's the only way we can get them to listen to us. I think it's obvious that that has not worked. The thinking right now is that by offering this system to Israel's defense, we can at least convince them to avoid striking more sensitive targets in Iran, like nuclear facilities or oil infrastructure. And, that might actually succeed in the short term, but we have to understand once these troops and this system is deployed in Israel, I don't know what incentive Netanyahu has to continue keeping his word and not keep escalating. And if you're asking why would we keep supporting, or why would the president keep supporting Netanyahu even when he knows that he'd rather have a Republican president, Donald Trump, in office, I think they just can't imagine another strategy. And it's really unfortunate to see that this administration, and to a certain extent the Harris campaign, would rather risk her election than distance themselves from Israel and from the genocide.
And what is your sense of how the impact of this recent decision to deploy these batteries to Israel, that the impact that's going to have on Iran or other enemies of Israel in the region?
Yeah, so in the near term, I don't think it's going to have a big impact because Iran knows where these troops will be deployed, and if it responds to Israel's next strike, it can probably successfully avoid hitting them or avoid hitting near them. Unfortunately, as the escalation continues, and if we move beyond symbolic messaging strikes to an actual war of annihilation, these troops are going to become targets, even if it's by accident, right? They probably have a survivability plan that means they displace to another location in a combat situation. So we're going to get to a point where even if they want to avoid killing Americans, Iran and Hezbollah may do so by accident. And then the other side of this is that Israel now has its own sort of American human shields that it can leverage to try and avoid a certain level of attacks from Iran, knowing that Iran does not want to kill Americans, and it knows it's got a new mechanism to drag America directly into a war with either Hezbollah or Iran, since now it's much more likely that U.S. troops can be killed on Israeli soil.
I want to ask you something that's not exactly in your wheelhouse, but I'm just curious what you think as a former official at the Defense Intelligence Agency about Donald Trump calling for the National Guard or the U.S. military to be deployed on U.S. soil to target what he called radical left lunatics. Trump made the call during an interview on Fox News. This is what he said.
I think the bigger problem are the people from within. We have some very bad people. We have some sick people, radical left lunatics. And I think they're and it should be very easily handled by, if necessary, by National Guard, or if really necessary, by the military, because they can't let that happen.
Your response, Harrison Mann.
Yeah, I'll just say, as somebody who's had friends and colleagues who were deployed to D.C. in 2020 or have been deployed on the border mission, I trust, you know, the non-commissioned officers and officers in the Army, in the National Guard, to not be, you know, aggressive against political activity. But I think the danger here is that if you do this deployment, which units might not refuse, you're then in a situation with really unclear guidance about what you're supposed to do with protesters, or what you're supposed to do with whatever group the president has told you to target. So I think, fortunately, our forces know the right thing to do, but when they end up in a situation with very unclear or maybe contradictory guidance between what the president is saying publicly and their own commanders are telling them, you have the risk of unintentional violence or uncontrolled violence.
And finally, Harrison Mann, we are just going into a segment on one of the largest arrest actions outside the New York Stock Exchange. Over 200 Jewish activists and their allies were arrested, calling for the U.S. to stop arming Israel. As a former U.S. Army major who resigned to protest U.S. support for Israel's war on Gaza, as a Jewish American, your thoughts? And also how activists on the outside in the streets, I often think about Dan Ellsberg when I think of this, you know, who is at the Pentagon and the RAND Corporation, and talked about seeing those protesters outside. You're on the inside. What does this mean? You're out now, but many of your colleagues are still in when they see these kind of mass actions.
Yeah, first, I appreciate that you mentioned that I'm Jewish too, and with respect to these protesters and my own advocacy, I think it's incredibly important for American Jews to talk about this, especially to demonstrate that Israeli Zionism is not the same as Judaism, and the actions of the Israeli state do not represent all Jews, and certainly don't represent American Jews, because unfortunately that's a claim that both Israeli politicians and American politicians like to make, which is that if you care about Jews, you have to support what Israel is doing in Gaza, West Bank, and Lebanon right now, and that's just patently untrue. And then I can tell you, both myself and some of the other officials who publicly resigned, we were influenced and affected by protest activity that we saw. In our case, in terms of the timing, the student protests were extremely affecting in feeling like, I'll just speak for myself, that I could no longer justify staying silent when we had 19-year-olds going to get beat up and risk their futures for this cause. So I can't promise that this is going to fix everything, but the people on the inside of our institutions do, in aggregate, notice this activism.
Harrison Mann, I want to thank you for being with us, a former U.S. Army major, a Jewish American who resigned to protest U.S. support for Israel's war on Gaza. He's now a senior fellow at Win Without War, a network of activists and organizations working for a more peaceful, progressive U.S. foreign policy. When we come back, we'll be joined by one of those activists outside the New York Stock Exchange, believed to be one of the largest mass arrests there in U.S. history. She was arrested. She's with Jewish Voice for Peace. Stay with us. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Protests over the U.S. arming Israel are continuing. On Monday morning, more than 200 Jewish activists and their allies were arrested as they blocked entrances to the New York Stock Exchange on Wall Street. The protesters were calling for an Israeli arms embargo, an end to war profiteering by companies like Raytheon and Lockheed Martin. Was organized by Jewish Voice for Peace, which said the action was the largest act of civil disobedience in history outside the New York Stock Exchange. Participants in the protests included descendants of Holocaust survivors, as well as Emmy Award-winning comedian Eric Andre, Academy Award-winning filmmaker Laura Poitras, the acclaimed artist Nan Goldin, the Oscar-nominated actress Deborah Winger, and the artist Molly Crabapple. Police forcibly removed many of the peaceful protesters, including our next guest, Elena Stein. She's Director of Organizing and Strategy for Jewish Voice for Peace. She was arrested, held for 8 hours. Welcome to Democracy Now! It's great to have you with us, Elena. There's a very dramatic picture of you being taken out, held, carried by police on your back. You're wearing the T-shirt you're wearing right now, Stop Arming Israel. Explain what this action was all about.
First of all, thank you so much for having me, Amy and Juan. I've been watching Democracy Now! Every morning for about 15 years, so appreciate everything you all do. Yesterday, 500 Jewish New Yorkers and friends shut down business as usual at the New York Stock Exchange on Wall Street, demanding, the epicenter of global capital, demanding that the U.S. stop arming Israel and stop profiting from genocide. And, as we arrive in the morning, we were learning the news that just that night, Israel had bombed the Al-Aqsa hospital and had set at least 30 tents ablaze, full of people who had already been displaced, who still had IVs in their arms from being at the hospital, burning people alive. And this comes after days
real
and
Holocaust.
Days of massacring whole families
Real Holocaust.
in the Jabalia refugee camp.
This is the Holocaust they saw 50 years ago.
Larger strategy to
6 million Israelites being killed by the IDF.
Starve, to essentially complete the
Israelite
ethnic cleansing
descent.
of northern Gaza.
The place called Stone
400,000
Palace.
people are.
Stone
This
Palace.
is being called a genocide within a genocide.
Palestine.
People are posting their final goodbyes.
Stone Palace.
So we are filled with horror beyond words.
What in that name since they
And are
can't live
attempting
together?
just to embody just an ounce of that refusal in our actions.
What in that name since Israelites,
And of course, what's so important for all of us here in the U.S. to understand is
Christians,
that this is being done with U.S. bombs.
and Muslims?
Those bombs that are massacring family after family in this war of extermination.
They can live
Make no
together.
mistake, that is the goal. Extermination. It is being done with U.S. bombs, with U.S. weapons, and with U.S. cover.
In a place
With
called Stone
shielding Israel from accountability at any international institution.
Palace.
Now, the Biden administration wants you to believe that the reason the U.S. is arming and funding and covering the Israeli government like this is for the sake of Jewish safety.
It's not.
Right? This is the moral cover that they use. This is the justification used to cloak the entire enterprise. And so we are there to say we reject this myth, this sick myth, with every fiber of our beings. We refuse to let our histories, our identities, our traditions be used to torture, to starve, to massacre, to erase Palestinians. And we are there to say the true interests of the Biden administration, the true interests of the U.S. government are this: its own imperial interests and its own financial interests.
Exactly.
And so we were there to say to the U.S., stop arming Israel, stop profiting from genocide.
Stop it.
And Elena, could you talk about why you chose the stock exchange? Because the reality is that every war that the United States has ever fought, some people have made money off of some sector of American capitalism. And in this case, could you talk about the arms makers and the huge, obscene amounts of money they are making from this war? Companies like Raytheon and Lockheed Martin.
That's exactly right. So most know that every year the U.S. sends $3.8 billion in military funding to Israel. Now, first thing to know is that this is an unprecedented amount of money. There is no amount of public taxpayer money going annually to any other country like this. The next thing to know is that none of that money is used. When we hear the word aid, we might think, oh, that's for recovery from a natural disaster or for housing or education. No, all of this money has to be used on the Israeli military for military purposes. And not only that, but all that money has to be used then back in the United States on U.S. defense contractors, on U.S. weapons corporations. So we see here that the entire enterprise has the goal of propping up the U.S.'s war economy. Now, $3.8 billion is just the amount of money typically going in taxpayer public funding. It is nothing to say of the billions going in private funding. But this year, the U.S. sent in public funding, the U.S. government sent $18 billion in taxpayer funds to the Israeli military. There are no words to describe how unprecedented this is. And so when we say that it's all in the service of propping up the U.S.'s war economy, it works. This year, the stock prices of weapons manufacturers were skyrocketing. Last year, if you were to invest $10,000 in Raytheon, right now, you would have $18,000 in just 1 year. That's an 80% return in 1 year. Raytheon is the firm making the bunker buster bombs that are prohibited from use in civilian areas that Israel is currently using right now in southern Lebanon. Now, not only that, over 50 at least members of Congress and their spouses are invested in Raytheon and Lockheed Martin, two of the leading weapons manufacturers. So we can see they are quite literally profiting from this genocide. And these are the people who are voting on increased funding and arms to the Israeli military. Our elected officials should never be able to profit off of genocide. They are there to carry out supposedly the will of the people. And you think about this. Just last week, Hurricane Helene ravaged communities across Appalachia, right? Killing hundreds of people, displacing thousands. This is just 1 week before Hurricane Milton did the same, ravaged Florida. And before the wreckage could even be accounted for, after Hurricane Helene, FEMA reported a $9 billion shortfall. At the exact same time, President Biden announced that he'd be releasing another $8.7 billion in military funding to the Israeli military. This is almost the exact same amount of money. So what we are seeing is that quite literally, the United States government is choosing to massacre in mass Palestinians over supporting our communities here in the United States who are trying to recover from this devastating climate crisis, as well as the chronic disinvestment from their communities. And so that's why we were there with 500 people yesterday to say, outside of Wall Street, this epicenter of global capital. And yes, as you said, Juan, Wall Street has been profiting off of genocide, every genocide of this country since the founding of this country, since the founding genocides. Wall Street was actually built as the first marketplace of to trade enslaved people kidnapped from the shores of Africa and then traded in 1711 on Wall Street by the European settlers who'd also carried out the genocide against the indigenous people of Manhattan. And we were there yesterday on Indigenous Peoples Day, and so that's part of why this history is so important to root in. And we pay homage to the many movements that have been protesting Wall Street ever since, from ACT UP, that actually had its founding protest on Wall Street in 1987, delaying the bell, and actually one of the organizers of that demonstration was with us yesterday in jail, which is so meaningful, to Occupy Wall Street, to many Palestinian-led demonstrations at Wall Street this year. And so that is why we were there to say altogether, fund FEMA, not genocide, fund housing, not genocide, fund healthcare, not genocide.
I want to turn to Samaya Awad of Adala Justice Project. She's a Palestinian who participated in the protest. You were arrested at the New York Stock Exchange. She's speaking here to CBS News.
We refuse for our government to continue doing this, using our tax dollars while our country is suffering from climate disaster, from lack of health care.
I also want to turn to 82-year-old Ross Pachetsky, a MacArthur Fellow, former anti-Vietnam War activist, current member of Jewish Voice for Peace. On Monday, she was one of the oldest people to chain herself to the Wall Street gates. She told CBS why she participated in the protest.
A lot of our resources are going to war. Jews have a long tradition of opposing war.
Ross Pachetsky is a professor emeritus at Hunter. As we hear those voices, Elena, you yourself are the granddaughter of a Holocaust survivor. Talk about that, how that informs your activism today, as the back of your T-shirt that says "Stop Arming Israel" on the front says "Not in our name."
The day that my grandmother's entire family and village was massacred in a different genocide, the Holocaust, my grandmother just happened to be absent.
The European Holocaust, not the American Holocaust.
I grew up knowing this fact and understanding that it means that, first of all, I'm not supposed to be here.
European,
My life is a
Israelite,
fluke.
Gypsy, Roma Holocaust.
And I also grew up agonizing over the question of, where were the neighbors? Why did they just stand by? Why didn't they hurl their bodies between the killers and my family? And so today, it's with all of my Jewish ancestors at my back, the one who survived, my grandmother, and all those who didn't, that I and all of them together say loudly, more profoundly than ever before, we refuse to be neighbors who just stand by. And I think so many of us in these demonstrations, especially as we watch the Israeli government cynically use the conflation of Judaism and Zionism. Let's be clear, Judaism is our rich thousands-year-old tradition. Israel is a 76-year-old apartheid state.
Exactly.
The cover has been pulled off Israel. People can see it for what it is.
Modern news.
And for the Zionist project and the project of ethnic cleansing and genocide and the full expansionist goals that it has, and it will use any means it can to make that project a reality. And the only excuse they have left, the only cover they have left, is to call any resistance to it anti-Semitism.
And they don't even know what Semite is.
We refuse this. There is nothing anti-Semitic about fighting for people's right to live, to live on their land, to thrive, to be safe at home. We refuse to let our traditions, our identities, our histories be used to allow for the torture, the mass torture, the mass starvation, the massacre and the erasure of Palestinians.
The protest on Monday was the latest in a long string of nonviolent protests led by Jewish Voice for Peace at Grand Central Terminal during rush hour, at the Statue of Liberty, at the Manhattan Bridge. Do you feel the Biden administration is hearing your voice?
May it be so. Listen, the Biden administration is watching all of us. They have watched the needle move. I mean, 2/3, the polls are showing that 2/3 of Americans now want an arms embargo. 2/3 of Americans are saying that they don't want arms to go to Israel. This is astonishing, and let's understand it for what it is, which is an extraordinary win by the Palestinian-led movement for Palestinian liberation. And of course, we see the Biden administration not listening. We see Congress not listening. All of us are asking, why is this? Well, first of all, it's because we don't live in a democracy. They don't have to listen to us. It is for their own imperial and financial interests. It is
Ever
for
since Reagan, the
their
USA
own
has been a
interest in
freaking one
controlling
state
the region,
puppet,
which
puppet
have been broken open and uncovered in so many of the interviews you've done here on Democracy Now!
dictatorship.
And it's for their financial interests and financial gain, because we know of the corporate control of this country. And so we see this moment of, I mean, to be quite honest, we see a lot of despair and a lot of hopelessness right now, especially as Israel expands its war of extermination deeper into Gaza and then throughout Lebanon and, you know, bombing Lebanon and Syria and Yemen and the West Bank and the risk, the threat to soon be bombing Iran at the same time. To watch them not just listen, but to expand it at the same time is truly extraordinary. And to feel so many millions more terrorized as they're watching their loved ones in these other countries now fleeing for their lives as well. And we refuse to give up. Right? We take inspiration from all of the movements that came before us that never gave up after 1 year of not winning. We take inspiration especially from the Palestinian struggle that has been here fighting for 76 years and has never thrown in the towel because it is such an uphill battle. And all of us here in the belly of the beast, where we know is in control of these arms and these funding, we must do the exact same. We cannot give up. We must double down right now. And even if the path to that arms embargo is getting increasingly muddled as we see them refuse to listen to us, we know that what all of us must be doing is applying this pressure from every angle possible, and that every single one of us has a role to play.
Elena Stein, I want to thank you for being with us. She is the Jewish Voice for Peace Director of Organizing Strategy, a descendant of a Holocaust survivor.
I doubt it's poor connection
Monday
because
morning, she was arrested along with
Instagram's
about
end,
two
because I got
other Jewish
TuneIn Radio
activists and
put it on the
allies
same
in one of the
phone
largest acts
that
of
it said poor connection for
200
Instagram.
Jewish activists and allies in one of the largest acts
So
of
the
civil
connection's not poor
disobedience the
through
New York
Bell
Stock Exchange
or
has seen,
through
demanding
Wi-Fi
the
here.
U.S. stop arming
The connection
Israel.
is poor
When we come back,
due to something
Union
at Instagram's
is the
end.
name of a new film. We'll speak to the co-director and organizer. A documentary about the historic campaign of Amazon workers to unionize their warehouse in Staten Island, New York.
My
Back in 30 seconds.
internet feed. When in reality, I should have had people with me physically here, wherever I am, making sure my health is good. Not people that I cannot see in the cyber world, the virtual world, trying to monitor what I'm doing on the internet activity. We do not need that. We need people monitoring people with rare disabilities' health in the real time at the physical location, just like Amy D'Souza said, so they could feel them. They could be there. Oh, you're gonna fall down. I can catch you so you don't fall down. That doesn't work with trolls monitoring me through the wire. Waste of time. Losers. Nazis that want to freaking write off disabled people and just murder them all. Murder all dark-skinned people. Murder all disabled people. That's the Nazi way. Murder all disabled people. Murder all ethnic people.
This
That's
is
the Nazi
Democracy
way.
Now!,
One world government,
democracynow.org.
one
I'm Amy
religion.
Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
Bullshit world.
Today, the U.S. Supreme Court set to consider a labor case with major implications for the right of workers to organize. YAP USA Automotive Systems has asked the Supreme Court to block a National Labor Relations Board case that alleges the company illegally interfered with the union election at a Michigan plant. The company is challenging the case in part by claiming the NLRB's structure is unconstitutional. More than 20 other companies, including Amazon, one of the most powerful companies on earth, have filed similar lawsuits challenging the National Labor Relations Board's power. Now a new film documents how Amazon workers at Amazon's JFK 8 Fulfillment Center on Staten Island made history by voting to form the first Amazon union in U.S. history in 2022. The same year, Amazon spent more than $14 million to quash union drives by the company's workers. An NLRB investigation later found Amazon illegally prohibited them from distributing pro-union
Jeff
materials.
Bezos is a fag.
The documentary is called Union. This is
Let them
its
organize the union. And if you don't, Jeff Bezos, you'll always be a fag to us.
Company has not been held accountable.
Is Chris Smalls, he was fired when he went outside and protested.
All financial gain should be shared amongst all employees of the company. Not the end of the year the CEO get $1 million or $5 million bonus. All that cash should be shared amongst the least paid of the employees. Not cash given to the most paid of the employees. What kind of system is that?
Right now, Amazon is on their high horse, and we want to punch them in their face.
Exactly. That's what I want to do. Punch fucking Jeff Bezos in the face.
Hey, you know that's illegal, right? You're not supposed to be doing that.
This is the long haul, right? This is the marathon.
This is our shot to make things better.
The demands of workers at Amazon's JFK 8 Staten Island warehouse included better pay, benefits, and working conditions. In this clip from the film Union, an Amazon union organizer interrupts a mandatory anti-union meeting the company organized.
We're asking you to do three simple things. Get the facts, ask questions, and vote no to the union.
Fuck.
So that's the ultimate theme. Remember, your signature is worth something. So protect your signature.
Hi, my name is Natalie. I'm a sword inductor on the ship dock, and I'm actually one of the organizers for the Amazon Labor Union. Just to let you know, the leader of the ALU is Chris Smalls. He was fired last April when he went outside and protested because we were not getting PPE inside the factory, even though we were processing it for the rest of the world. Okay, so him and his friends that also worked here got fired. Okay, so when I say that we put a union out there that is worker-led and is Amazon employees, we have all of you in mind. It's workers protecting workers and standing up for workers.
That's what I like.
You guys, no. I want to say one more thing.
That's what
you
I
talk
like.
about $1,200. Union busters make $2,000 to $3,000 per day, paid by Amazon to sell everybody out.
A clip from
I
the
don't
new
like union
documentary
busters
which
at all.
opens theatrically in New York this Friday at IFC Center. It's directed
They're the
by
devil's
the acclaimed
agents,
filmmakers
union
Brett Story
busters.
and Steve Mang. Mang joins us now along with Connor Spence, who's in the film, now president
Just
of
like people
the
making
Amazon
phone
Labor
calls, calling
Union,
themselves
IBT
collections
Local 1,
agents?
a member
No.
of the Teamsters. Earlier
That's a
this
migrant
year, the
farmer
ALU affiliated
that
with the
collects
International Brotherhood of
produce.
Teamsters to
He thinks
become
people eat
ALU IBT. We
off
welcome you
the
both
plants
to Democracy Now!
for the
So,
farmer.
Steve, talk
That's
about
the
the
collections.
significance of this film dropping
That's the
or
only
opening
collection
now.
agencies we care about.
First off, thank you so much for
American
having us. We're
indigenous
huge fans of you,
migrants
Juan.
that have more
this
right
is a
to be in
film
citizenship,
that,
Canada and the United States,
a narrative
than the
about
people the
labor
Nazis keep on
organizing
bringing
that,
here.
Many have been talking about. We saw a resurgence in labor organizing after almost 50 years of decline in union density. And this was a group of workers in Staten Island, New York, who got together and decided that enough was enough, right? These were workers that have often been called the invisible working class, and that was because they've been
largely long been voiceless and disempowered from pushing back, and were in many ways considered by traditional unions unorganizable. This was a $1 trillion company that they took on, and in an incredible feat of organizing and determination, were able to win in a near landslide against Amazon in April of 2022.
And Steve, given that your film centers on labor rights and so many of the streaming platforms these days are controlled by corporations with their own embattled labor histories, like Apple, for instance, or Amazon, what was the response of the distribution platforms, and what did you have to do to get the film out?
Well, we had the great honor of premiering the film at Sundance, actually receiving an award there. We were one documentary among 15,000 that applied to get into that festival. And despite that, we've also had the distinct honor of experiencing what a lot of doc makers have been experiencing in this industry, which is in an attempt to distribute a film that falls into the genre of political cinema, we're dealing with a very corporatized, myopic industry that does not necessarily value narratives like this as much. And so we, much like the Amazon Labor Union, have been charting a more independent course to distribute the film on our own. And it's in many ways been a more gratifying and exciting process.
I wanted to go to another clip. In this scene from Union, 3 Amazon union organizers, including Chris Smalls, who would become the first ALU president, are handcuffed, detained by New York police for being on Amazon warehouse property.
Hey, Chris. Like I said, man, I'm going to ask you and anyone who's not an Amazon employee has to leave the premise, please. Anyone who is an Amazon employee, I am not speaking to you. You guys are free to stay.
Okay, but are we in the parking lot that says visitor, right?
You're currently trespassing on Amazon property if you are not an Amazon associate. So anyone here
I
who's
didn't
not an
answer the
Amazon
question,
associate.
though. That sign over there says visitor, right? I'm a visitor.
With who? What are you doing?
I'm visiting with him. They work here.
How long have you been here for, Sam?
A few minutes.
So you're refusing to leave?
No, I said I'm gonna leave when he leaves.
Are you refusing to leave?
I said no, I'm gonna leave when he leaves.
Are you leaving? Yes or no? Yeah, sir, yes. If you're not leaving within the next 2 minutes, you're gonna be arrested.
You're not enforcing no law. You're just wasting your time.
You have 30 seconds before you get arrested.
I'm gonna get arrested? How am I gonna get arrested for? For what? For what? You wanna arrest me for what? If you do that, hey, look, man. Right now you're obstructing police right now.
Lawsuit against Amazon. Litigation against Amazon and Jeff Bezos directly.
So Chris Smalls, who would become the first president of American Labor Union, was arrested there. He had already been fired as an Amazon worker for protesting the lack of COVID protocols. We're joined by Connor Spence, who is the second president
Lawsuit
of the
Amazon,
American
Jeff
Labor Union.
Bezos and the management.
You also were fired of the Amazon Labor Union. You also were fired. You were there at that moment.
Yeah.
Talk about how Amazon cracked down on all of you. You still remain today, this Staten Island warehouse, the only unionized warehouse, Amazon unionized warehouse in the country.
Yeah, I mean, we are probably the most surveilled workforce anywhere.
1.5 million workers.
Yeah, and when you're in the warehouse, everything's tracked, every movement you make, the time you're away from your station. And Amazon can really weaponize that against you once you start to unionize. They can find ways to fire you. They found a way to fire Chris when he was protesting the lack of safety protocols during the pandemic. They found a way to fire me for a policy that the NLRB now considers to be illegal and ordered them to rescind nationally. They have a lot of ways that they can retaliate against organizers, and both Chris and I have, unfortunately, had the police called on us by Amazon, been arrested, never goes anywhere, but it is an intimidation tactic they use. It's a way they try to control the workforce and waste your time and prevent you from being able to organize and talk to people.
Yeah, Connor, I wanted to follow up on that. This because given the fact that Amazon has so many employees and they are usually in these huge fulfillment centers, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 workers in a place, why it's been so difficult for the organized labor to make any inroads other than in your fulfillment center, your warehouse, in terms of unionizing Amazon.
Yeah, I would say, like, by design, basically it's built to be difficult to organize. The turnover in an Amazon warehouse on average is 150%. So our campus on Staten Island alone churns through about, there's 10,000 workers, so it churn through about 15,000 New Yorkers every year. And that's by design. That's not an accident. The average worker stays about 8 months before they quit. They're fired by a computer or they injure themselves. So already going in, that's a difficult task to organize. There's a scene in the documentary where the first time that we had filed for an NLRB election, we needed to sign up 30% of the active employees of the workforce in order to have a sufficient showing of interest to get the NLRB to come do a union election at our warehouse. But by the time we submitted those cards, I think over 1,000 of them were for employees that had been fired or quit since. So already it's a huge task for any union to take on. As far as what made us successful, I would say, a lot of it was endurance. We had a model of organizing that was very much worker to worker. We were inside the warehouse, building relationships with people, creating that sense of community. We started as an independent union, so we were basically a blank slate. There wasn't much Amazon could do to union bust or try to third party and separate people from the union, which is a common tactic that these corporations often try to do. They try to third party the union, make workers feel as though it's something that they're not a part of, they're not responsible for. And so I think a lot of things kind of aligned in our case that we were able to be victorious when it's clearly really a struggle to organize and unionize these warehouses.
We just have 10 seconds. Why did you decide to affiliate with Teamsters?
It's national organizing is too much for an independent union to do by ourselves. And if we want to have a chance of taking Amazon to the table, creating that pressure, there has to be national organizing.
I want to thank you both for being with us. The film opens this week.
This Wednesday at IFC Center in New York City and then across the country.
Steve Mang is co-director of Union. Connor Spence is president of the Amazon Labor Union IBT Local 1. Again, happy birthday to Juan Gonzalez. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez for another edition of Democracy Now!
From the roots up, CIUT 89.5 FM, Toronto.
USA and the imperialists that freaking are not sharing the revenue from these billion-dollar corporations to the least paid workers that work so hard. Yet instead, they take the financial gain, the excess cash that they don't need for operating budget the next year, and instead of distributing it amongst the lowest paid employees to make the world equitable, they put it all in their pocket, in their account. How is that caring? That is not sharing. Sharing is caring. These people don't share. The world could have been equitable since year 2000, but the people that keep on saying the earth is flat and keep on saying that the Mayans said the world would end don't want you to know the truth of all cultures' history. You just keep on running the narrative that the world would end. You watch media always talking about the world end? How many dramas, science fiction, bullshit have been made that the world is going to be obliterated, fully destroyed, baseless, based off incorrect information? The whole global warming that the media talks about in the news is baseless, seems to be based on a flat earth model of the earth, which keeps heat in a closed system. The atmosphere, there is no dome, there is no separation. Hot air keeps on rising. The sun sends warm air to us every day. We had coronal mass ejections, G5 solar storms this year. Mother's Day weekend in May, intensified rains worldwide. They intensified Hurricane Milton and Helen. Did the news media talk about that? No, the news media doesn't, because the news media is controlled by Nazis and Zionists, taking humanity for a ride. Zionists, every time you speak up against what they're doing to Israelite descendants that are still, some of them, Jews, Hebrew, some of them converted to Christianity, and some of them converted to Islam. Before the state of Israel existed, they used to live together in the Levant, in the most western part of the Arabia. There is no east there. Middle East what? Middle of where? It's not even in the middle of Asia. It's the most western part of the Arabia. If you want to say it was connected to Africa, it's the most eastern part of what was considered Africa before. So there is no Middle East where Israel is concerned. The Zionists and the Nazis colluded together to steal cash that was earmarked for indigenous Americans, the jewel, not the Jews, the jewel, Jewel of America. The ghost seers, the real two-spirit people that are only born one gender and will never change their gender through their life because they know the real indigenous history. Stop sexualizing the meaning of two-spirit. It has nothing to do with lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or whatever plus movement you think about or want. LGBT, my cousin was upset at me in the early 90s, originally meant lost. Girls, boys, trafficked, taken, transported against their will, quietly, in the night, sometimes, by predators, sexual predators that still run the United States government. In 1984, I am 100% sure I said, if Biden becomes the president of the United States, you know the immortal sex cult has taken over the world. We don't want Bison in America. We don't want Biden, the person Biden in America. We want bisons roaming back across the America. We want bison on our plate to eat, not pork. Pork keeps on being forced down American Indians' throats, as well as tobacco. That's the Virginian that's forcing that on us. Tobacco is not American indigenous peace pipe. A status Indian agreed with me on that. He happens to be one of the tribes that's in my blood. He agreed right in front of me that tobacco makes people violent. And cannabis relaxes people and makes them calm. Now again on firewater. Firewater makes a lot of people violent, i.e. alcohol. Alcohol used to be in vehicles' engine. The steam got pumped by OPEC. And now, currently, the same Nazis and Zionists that run the United States government claiming anti-Semitism every time you speak up about what they're doing. They're not Semite. Semite is a genetic people. Genetic stock. Israelites are Semite. Some Muslim are Semite. Some Christians are Semite. Many North Africans are Semitic. Many Arabians are Semitic. The Bible talks about Abraham and his earlier ascendants going from the Arabia to Africa many times. Arabia, Africa, Arabia, Africa, Arabia, Africa, Arabia, Africa. Therefore, Semites, descendants of Shem, just one of Noah's sons, can be Arabic and can be African. Arabian is a culture. Africa has many cultures. Arabic is also a script for a language. Islam is a spirituality. Christianity is a spirituality path. Hebrewism is a spirituality path. There are Jews, Hebrews, that write in Arabic. There are Christians that speak Greek that write in Arabic script. There are many Christian sects, S-E-C-T-S, meaning variation of a Christian branch, that write in Arabic script, and they write Amharic, or the ancient Hebrew language, in the Arabic script. So the real Semites are the ones with the modern state of Israel script, calling themselves Israeli, but never identifying as Israelite, but always calling out anti-Semite when people are calling them for their bologna sandwich bullshit. Lead in petroleum caused memory loss. Lead was in the petroleum heavy in the 70s and 80s. Luckily, some people got that taken out of the petroleum. So some people's memory started getting better. A next thing that is in things to cause memory is fluoride in toothpaste. People used to use ash to brush their teeth before. Ash water. But because the smoke has been tainted by petroleum and other poisons, much people don't use ash water to brush their teeth anymore. They're all taking Colgate or Crest, national brands, heavy with fluoride, which cause memory loss. Then again on TV they promote drinking alcohol so much. Another thing that causes memory loss, and a lot of people don't realize, heavy alcohol, high content, 40% alcohol, they make it seem like it's the smoking that causes lung cancer. But I've been to smoky clubs, I've been in smoky cars, and I'm telling you, I wheeze heavy when I got those alcohol in me and the smoke's around. I've heard that it's the hard alcohol, 40% and higher, when you drink it, it makes you wheeze. That causes lung cancer. But are they telling you like that? No. They make believe it is the smoke that causes the bulk of the lung cancer. Asbestos. I got a little bit left there in my cough. It's very weak right now. So it seems like I gotta put my head into the bowl and take a breath. Why? That's water with the real peace pipe in there. Not tobacco, not no cocaine. not no foolishness. The real peace pipe herb, not the Virginian smoke that the New World Order says we gave to the world and we didn't. Yeah. Back again about the USA was taken over by Nazis after what they called World War II ended. They call it paperclip Nazis. High-level Nazis were just written, given new names, and taken into USA. Meanwhile, at the same time, these paperclip Nazis were paperclipped into USA. Currently, Congress, USA, each Congress member has 2 Israeli advisors. This is America. Judaism didn't start in America. It started in Africa. Why in America would congressmen have 2 Israeli advisors when they should have American indigenous advisors? That means United States is under foreign influence of Nazis and Zionists. Zionists that always call out anti-Semitism and probably cannot even prove they are Semitic genetically. Semites being the descendant of Shem from the Bible, one of Noah's ancestors. And to top that, 50 Congress members in the United States are profiteering, financially gaining, making a revenue stream off of the death and murder of people worldwide. In the Congo, in South Sudan, in the Levant, formerly called Palestine, Stone Palace. What is wrong with a name like Stone Palace? Does it disrepresent Israelites? Does it disrepresent Christians? Does it not represent Muslims? They all build stone temples, stone places of worship. There is nothing wrong with the name Stone Palace, aka Palestine. I bet you if you test the Israelis' bloods, how many of them are Semitic, but yet they've been shouting anti-Semitism this whole time. And the true anti-Semites are the ones that promote armed conflict, hostilities, fighting between the descendants of Shem, the descendants of Abraham, the descendants of Adam. Real talk. Real talk. R-E-A-L. And I guess it is on R-E-E-L at the same time. This is Shak Nogi from the island that used to have fruit bats but don't have them no more. Take care.